Jason, as it is each and every week, the Lee Summit Town Hall podcast is brought to the good people by Budget Blinds of Lee Summit.
Budget Blinds!
Hey, did you know that the Signature Series automated shades, they provide a safer environment for children and pets due, Jason, to their cordless nature?
All hail our Signature Series overlords.
Hey, you can even program them. It's really cool. You just program right in your phone, allow you to use your heating and cooling only when you need it for maximum energy efficiency.
All hail.
Head on down to our friends at Budget Blinds of Lee Summit right in downtown on Main Street. Tell them Jason and Nick sent you.
Hello again, and welcome to Lee Summit Town Hall, a weekly podcast about what you can do to make a difference. I'm Jason Norbury, and as always, I am joined by a man who is already done with last decade.
So done.
It's Nick Parker, the publisher of Link to Lee Summit. Are you don't want to relive the past?
You know, I'm ready to move forward. That's the fun. The last few years have been good, but it's time to move forward. Always move forward.
Choices were made. Things are done. It's in the past now. We want to look forward.
Right.
That's how it goes. All right. Link to Lee Summit is the source for all the news you need about this very fine city. And our unofficial sponsor today are all the dad jokes about seeing you tomorrow or next year or even next decade.
I got to admit.
Yeah, you've done it.
I've been doing that to the son for the last week.
Your son
is nothing but dad jokes.
Your son is old enough now to just get into the not trying to make it because he thinks it's funny or would giggle, but because it's pure torment for them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, that's kind of the role.
Yeah. So that we are joined today by a very special guest. It is John Beaudoin, the proprietor of KC Communications and Media Matters.
Oh, and regular guest columnist for Link to Lee Summit.
And regular guest columnist for Link to Lee Summit. Johnny, how are you today?
Irregular guest columnist. I am great, guys.
Irregular? Well, you are irregular.
Right. Yeah.
The columns are regular.
The columns are regular.
You get some Metamucil or some fiber for that.
You need to eat more bran.
They're about I absolutely need to eat more fiber. But that's a different topic. No, it's great to be here, guys. Last time we came on, I know there were a lot of great topics that we tackled, and I think between the three of us, we probably hit about every corner of Lee Summit in one way or another, whether it's the schools or the city or committees or just things that we know and things we've done. So I enjoy being on to talk about what we did and what's coming up next year.
Well, coming up, see, Jason, you did it. You said looking ahead. Mm-hmm. It's almost as if we wrote out show notes.
Well, we did write out show notes, but planning is maybe a bit of a stretch. But we did write out some show notes.
Today's episode, and we had John join us. Today's episode, what we want to do is look forward. Let's look at some of the stories for 2020 that we're expecting to see, that we know we're going to follow, and there's some questions out there that we hope to see answered. So that's what today is. We're actually we're gonna break this into two parts actually. So we're gonna talk a little bit about some of the things going on around the city for today's episode, and then come back Friday. We're gonna talk about some of the big stories that we expect to see in 2020 surrounding the Lee Summit R7 school district.
All right, but before we do that, we forgot one thing we have to say. Happy New Year.
Oh yes.
Yeah. As you are hearing this, it is now January of 2020. We made it.
We have hit a new decade.
So we are
feels a little different.
I feel totally different.
Hey Nick, we've been podcasting now for decades.
Wow.
Well, listen, if that's the bar.
Well, look. Let's be fair.
Set the bar
low. We have made a habit and actually a goal of consistently setting the bar low for this episode, this podcast.
Because then we clear it and we feel like we've accomplished something. It's important that way. All right, Nick, what's our first story?
All righty. Well, look, let's start right here in a place that is near and dear to all of us. We have all served on the board of directors at one time or another for this group. Let's talk about Downtown Lee Summit. Let's talk about Downtown Lee Summit Main Street organization. There's some big news happening. The news started last year in the last quarter, but it's still going forward. Let's start with there are apartments coming to downtown. We're finally, after 10, 12 years of talking about it, we are going to increase the housing density in the downtown district. Guys, are you still excited? I know we still haven't hit like actual, demolition yet or vertical construction.
I'll be real excited when something besides the ceremonial shovel goes into the ground,
which we haven't done that yet.
either. But no, I keep hearing spring, and I keep hearing finished sometime in 12 to 18 months after we break that ground, and I think what it means for downtown is just it's going to obviously it's going to add a lot of density and hundreds of residents. We know that it's not going to fill our schools up because of the price point of these apartments is going to be high enough where people aren't bringing in a lot of small children. Small children to those apartments. But I also it's a lesson in patience, I think, for the businesses, because the businesses downtown have been waiting for a long time.
I mean, it's only been like 16 years.
Right, for density to come downtown. And some businesses, unfortunately, that time have come and gone. But the businesses that survived streetscape and survived the 2008 recession and have survived all these things over the years and have stayed here through this are going to get a huge reward when that finally gets open. We just have to be patient and wait for that to happen.
I agree. I am this has been one of the things that has been on my wish list for downtown, but I would echo back on that. And not only did the businesses do to get the reward, but the businesses and the way that this district has evolved and grown over the years is really is the thing that set the table for these apartments to come in. If downtown was struggling, right, or downtown was not thriving well, we wouldn't have these apartments. Nobody would want to build anything over on that whole thing. But we wanted to make sure that worked that way. So I think it's not only a congratulations to downtown, but also to those businesses for setting that bar that an apartment developer wanted to come in.
Yeah, and when we talk about the sheer numbers of who's in the peripheral of downtown, we like to you walk just a block from any of the corners, from 2nd and Green, from 3rd and Green, from Market, from you extend out to Jefferson a little bit, and we always talk about what does it mean to live in the downtown core and not live in the downtown core. We just don't have that housing down here that some downtowns have, and we haven't found the right developer to come and develop that yet. And it's always that chicken and egg discussion with development. The people say, well, we need this and we need that. We hear that with whether it's a Trader Joe's or new residents or apartments or housing, things like that. My response is always, when that time is ready, when the developer finds that time is ready, you'll see those things down here, and that's where I think we're finally hitting that peak at 2nd and Douglas. We're going to get those residents down here, and everyone's going to see the benefit of that. But that's going to precipitate new conversations about parking, about the next parking structure, about what that means for driving on 3rd Street and 2nd Street. So many people use 2nd and 3rd as their thoroughfare from 291 to 50. All those things are going to change, especially on 2nd Street when we have 350 new residents all piled in there.
And I agree. I think those new questions, not only how does that impact the living we have, but what is this, influx of demand of these people who are coming in who are going to want stuff? How is that going to impact future development? Are we going to see a continued evolution of the downtown? Perhaps its footprint grows a little bit, which I think actually transitions us to our next downtown topic.
Yeah, I think it does, because one of the things that this is going to immediately affect is the home of the current downtown Lee Summit Farmers Market,
yep,
which is across the street from the former church that will be developed into apartments. And so now we look for, and this is another thing we've talked about for 10 years or more, a new permanent home for the farmers market. Well, at the last State of the City address from Mayor Bill Baird, it was announced the city is working to purchase the rest of the property across Green Street.
Right.
And the plan includes a permanent home for the downtown farmers market, as well as an outdoor performing arts space, which was part of a city bond issue. And John, was that 7 years ago now?
April of 2013.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think
sounds like you've said something about that before, John.
I try to mention it at least every 6 months.
So I think this is more, maybe the story here is that some long-term plans are hopefully finally coming to fruition.
Well, I hope that's the case. We all leave. I think every single year, going back to my time here, even years ago, covering Mayor Messerly, you always have some kind of big takeaway. You want some kind of takeaway from the state of the city, and I think this year's takeaway was, wow, there is a lot on paper. There is a lot of big ideas. There's a lot of plans going into place at 3rd and Green there. And when does all this happen? And how do we fund this? And I have talked about this several times, that at some point we're going to have a capital campaign to raise part of this money. We can do land sale backs and things like that, but we're still far and away over the original price tag, which we knew we were going to be. That original price tag of $600,000 or whatever.
Well, I think it's fair to say the scope of this project has drastically changed from what was originally talked about, which is fine.
It's fine. It's fine, except that's not what the voters approved. Now I'm on board with that. But we've got to remember, especially when we're going ahead with these kind of issues that we're putting in front of voters, that we have to maintain some kind of reliability and accountability to the voters when we put something on a ballot to say this is what we're going to do. The voters that passed that in 2013 had no idea that this would roll out in the way that it did. And it's going to be the benefit of downtown. But, man, there's a lot of unanswered questions. Where is all this money coming from? Do either of you know?
Well, I mean, I think that there's been enough public stuff about the memorandum of understanding between the downtown CID, downtown Main Street, and the city that at least they have some rough sketches of where that money is going to come from. But in the end, I mean, we don't even know a price tag yet, right? I mean, and it's so.
Well, I think it's important to note that as of now, the deals for the land have not closed. The sales aren't final yet, so all of this is a little bit of
right. And then
conjecture.
there's lots of questions about how is the land cost going to be handled since it's owned by the city, and there's literally millions of things to discuss,
right.
Many of them dollars, and how we deal with that as we go through. But I think that there's a commitment and. Realistically, this is the first time I think we've seen the mayor. I mean, the city council really hasn't spoken in a unified voice on this so far,
right.
but we've seen the mayor put some political capital forth to say this is a thing that I want to see happen, and get that going. So, a lot of this is on the mayor and his sense of collaboration to help bring this together and figure out where that money's going to come from, and then come to the voters or come to the people and say publicly, this is what it's going to cost. This is what it's going to look like. These are how the costs are going to be shared.
Well, and I think John alluded earlier when he was talking about the apartments about it's timing and when the developers come forth, because that's really who's going to make things happen. That's the cash, Jason, that you were talking about. And I think what we're going to see is, and what the mayor alluded to a little bit, is we're probably going to see a pretty big public-private development happen here, where some of that land will be sold back to the developers, and that's where the cash is going to come to make some of this stuff happen. What the final picture is going to be, we don't know.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But I think it's important in 2020, this was thrown out, obviously not offhand, because the mayor had all kinds of drawings and ideas up there that he put on the screen, but it kind of got thrown out there and is kind of sat quietly. And I think it's not unreasonable to anticipate to be somewhat quiet until the land sale closes. But once that comes, and one would anticipate that would happen this year, if it hasn't already, that they just haven't said it out loud, to say, hey, okay, now you've got the land, let's go. Let's get the next steps going.
Right. And every step of this from and hopefully it appears that way from the past, but if it hasn't appeared that way, it should be that way now. Every step of this has to be done very much in public view, I think, from now on. The further we deviate from what actually went on the ballot in April 2013 to the new plan, I think we have to be just super overboard deliberate on communicating that to the general public, because there's a lot of people that voted for that and put in their own time and sweat equity and their money to make sure that passed in 2013. And in the meantime, Legacy Park is done and the museum is done, and these other projects have been checked off the list. Let's get this one done.
Well, now that we're talking, we've talked a little about money. That I want to kind of stick with that theme a little bit, and let's go to another story that is just now starting to develop. The council just talked about this and made a request to staff, and that is that on the next ballot may be a use tax, a new tax for the people to vote on, and this alludes to, Jason, something you and I have talked about on this show before. Is the city manager, Steve Arbo, has come out and said that, hey, we're looking at a possible budget shortfall in the 2020-2021 fiscal year. So let's talk a little bit about what a use tax is and maybe what will be before the voters.
Sure. I mean, the short version is that Lee's Summit as a city does not capture any kind of tax on sales done through the internet. except for I think Missouri on Missouri sales, and maybe not even on those. So Amazon, for instance, has struck a deal with the various and sundry states, and when you purchase something from here on their service, you do pay a state sales tax. This use tax is essentially the same thing as a sales tax. I don't think even we want to get that far into the weeds to talk about the functional differences between the two. But the idea being is that it would apply to internet sales and then bring in revenue for the city.
And one of the things that this topic came up a while back during a Velocity Lease Summit event, interestingly enough, because we were talking about businesses coming in, businesses coming out. And I don't have the numbers from the city about how many business licenses were written up in 2019 and how many were renewed in 2019 or not renewed, as it were, in 2019. But we have to keep a close eye, and I think we are, on what's happening at Summit Woods, Summit Fair, in some of our strip malls on 291 and off of 50. Businesses coming in and out, obviously that all plays into that sales tax base. And yeah, I'm guilty of it. I shop local as much as anybody, but man, you get online and you get that thing ordered and you see the line item that says zero tax or whatever it is, and it floors me that we're not capturing that. We have to do something. We've got to find some way to bring some of that back, because there are a couple of big box retailers right now that are probably hanging by a thread, I would guess. That we're going to see go out sometime. We've seen restaurant groups be hit this last year. Restaurant groups have taken a beating on bankruptcies, and if we lose a couple of restaurants, we lose a couple over there off Chipman. We're going to see that number take an even bigger hit.
Absolutely, and not only so you have the two things. One, we have the sort of a decline in retail sales, as many of those sales, although food is obviously one that you don't do as much internet on.
Sure.
Shift over to virtual sales, but in addition to that, we have the shifting nature looking forward, and this last fall was not the first time that our city manager has come forth with hey guys, look at this budget, you need to pay attention to tax revenues or we're going to have a problem, we need to fill this hole coming forward, and that's an important piece. But I would note for a second, it's an important piece. And that's a conversation that we'll need to have through the course of the spring, is up to the election for it. But it's not a sufficient piece.
No, and I think that was what I was going to bring up, was the second half of the story that we're going to watch is whether that passes or not. And say it does pass.
Right.
It's not enough to make up for the shortfall that Arbo is kind of warning the city council about. So it will be interesting for us to watch the discussions that the council has on the dais as they look for other ways to make up for that gap.
Well, it's lucky that we're not coming into an election season.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Nobody's going to say anything out of the blue or make any unreasonable claims from the dais as we go through this process.
But that's never happened.
Do you dare put a use tax on a ballot in 2020? You can't. They won't do it for April. We know that. But do you stick it on an August ballot when it's a presidential primary, or do you stick it on a presidential year, God forbid, a November ballot? That's all going to tie into this conversation, because voters will be flooding to the polls next year, and so this it could definitely go one way or another.
It's up there, but I think even if they get it on the ballot in time for the next fiscal year or not, whether it passes or not, we still have that core question. Really, the difference is how big that gap is going to be,
right,
and what the council members are going to do.
Well, right. And that's a great question to be asking of our candidates as they get forward. Here's a gap that's been pinpointed. What ideas do you have, or how do you plan to work with the rest of council, with the rest of the city, to try to find a solution? We all saw the previous council election cycle. We all saw a lot of language coming from the dais and coming from political groups about things that they wanted, but when it came to the question of how do you pay for it, it got pretty nasty.
Well, revenue streams have to be at the top of the list, but in the top 5 of things we're going to ask these city council candidates, right? I hope so.
Well, okay. Well, let's as we transition into, we're going to talk about that big story coming, which is the election. I just want to. Here's what we have. We have running for city council. There is a seat available in each of the 4 council districts throughout the city. In District 1, Hillary Shields and Robert Dye have both filed for that seat, which will be vacated by Rob Binney, who is termed out.
Yep.
In District 2, Roberta Goff has the only one that's filed for that seat, which is being vacated by Craig Faith, who announced, I think it is a surprise to many of us, that he's not running for re-election.
Late summer, early fall, yeah.
In District 3, Phyllis Edson has filed to run for re-election. There is no one yet running against her. And in District 4, Fred DeMauro, who it seems, because of the way things lined up, is running for re-election every 6 months, something like that. He has announced he's running for re-election, and Donnie Funk has filed to run as competition for that seat. So here's what I want to know from you guys. We've talked a little bit about the budget question and that kind of thing. What other questions do you have? What other questions do you think these candidates need to answer so that voters can make the best decision?
I think the budget question is, and in all honesty, as we get through all this, and as we've come through all of the hubbub that preceded 2018's elections and gone through all of that, things have gone relatively quietly. In the overall scheme of things, it's been relatively quiet from the dais. There hasn't been a lot of bombast and a lot of that. There have been some sniping back and forth and the normal, I would say, interpersonal politics sort of thing. But things are fine. And when that's fine, when things are running smoothish, right? The question is how do we spend the money that we bring in? How much money we're going to bring in? Where do we allocate it on the way out? We just had, and we are just about in the process of finishing the strategic plan process. So I think questions about that are going to be key. And I honestly, talking about the use tax and other forms of revenue enhancement or budget expenditures are going to be important questions to find out where these people's priorities are.
And incentives and economic development are I think are central key issues right now because they touch virtually all 4 districts. But again, right now you've got development off Pryor. You've got, we don't know what's happening over at the Grove on 50. You've got Paragon Star. You've got Village at View High. I want to know from these candidates that have not weighed in, or even if they have weighed in, for those incumbents that are running again, for Fred DeMauro and Phyllis Edson and the like, the people that have been on the council, what are we looking at these developments if they're stalling, if they're stalled out, or if they're not moving? What can we do to help enhance that, to help move some of those projects forward? And where are our new opportunities for development? You've got the Mormon land that supposedly is going to be opening up soon. That's going to open up possibilities not only in commercial development, but probably in housing. You have all those little pieces, and I think economic development and incentives are to me sometimes the backbreaker for candidates. You and I, Jason and Nick, you and I we can watch these forums or interviews that you do with candidates, the chamber forums or anywhere else, and kind of know real quick how much or how little these candidates know about development and economic development. And if there's one piece of that pie that they have to have in their brain, I think when they come in to be a council member here, it's got to be some economic development know-how.
Well, and I think we saw how that plays in, and we'll just go back to the topic we started with, which was the apartment project here in downtown.
Right.
That thing almost came to a complete standstill based on an incentive request from the developer.
Right.
And so there is an ongoing debate.
An unprecedented
That's true.
Incentive request.
That's true. But, so here's the question. Do we need to ask these candidates if they're willing to be creative, to think of things differently than have been done in the past?
Yes, but I also want to ask them if they've read the city's economic incentive policy. That there are some very smart people in the room a few years ago that created this policy, and it was in its infancy at the time, but we were a city without a blueprint on what to do with incentives, and I want to know what they know about that document, and I don't need to know, are you for or against incentives? I want to know, as incentives are the reality to development, how do we best utilize those in our community?
I don't think it can be an either or question anymore. I think it used to be. There is someone sitting on the council who has spent many years fighting that either or debate. And
to be fair, he's really more of a neither nor. But yeah,
fair. But I think that having the discussion that way is no longer effective, right?
I don't disagree. I think that the biggest thing they have to. I think the city has a policy,
Yeah.
and it's fine to disagree with that policy, and it's certainly within the realm of the council, whatever form it takes in the coming year or 2 years, to have a relook at that policy if that's what they want to do.
Right.
Or if nothing else, there'll be times when they're going to maybe deviate from that policy, or times that they're going to make themselves adhere to that policy, and they need to be clear about that. And hearing from our candidates to be somewhat conversant in that idea, it's hard when you sit up there. I mean, the pressures that were on Craig Faith at the time at which when he was the key vote were tremendous especially for a city council vote in a mid-sized suburb in the middle of nowhere,
a non-election year.
In a non-election year, there's
yeah.
a lot of pressure on him for that,
Yep.
and to say that the person coming into that seat, whether any of these new people especially, would have a good feel for exactly how those pressures feel, because you don't know what that is until you're in it.
Right.
But I think to have an idea is like, this is the framework within which I look at it, and conversant with what's actually on the books is a good stop to go. And I mean, a simple question, a simple one is, all right, well, we did this one incentive for these downtown apartments.
Right.
What about the next one?
Right.
I mean, these are questions that we can ask to kind of get a better feel for it as well.
I'd sure like them to have an understanding on TIF and CID and all those things, and how we have been ahead of the curve, I think, in many areas on TIF, and that area at Chipman and 50 got developed. If not for these, we would still be driving. Would we still be driving to Independence or other areas to do our shopping? I mean, these things have a great place in the development realm and in the commercial development realm, and yeah, if you want to, I think if new council members want to throw the whole incentive policy out, that's going to have to be a long discussion. I think they need to get to know it, and they really need to understand where the tax money comes in and which parts of our community, and then take that conversation from that point of understanding, not from a point of saying I like this or I just don't like this. To me, that's disingenuous.
Other than, and Jason, you alluded to this earlier, other than the previous council election when we were talking about raises for city employees, we were talking about raises for our public safety employees, there really hasn't been any huge topics of contention. What other questions do you guys have? What do you think, other than development and what looking forward? Are there other questions that you have for candidates?
Well,
as
I think
we come up?
actually, this goes back into development, but I think there's some real questions to be asked about the PRI, the Mormon Church land.
Mm-hmm.
That is a huge percentage of the land mass of an already very large area city, and I know that the owners of the land don't have any intention to dump it all on the market at one time, but sensitivity to market conditions and what have you, when that stuff comes on, what kind of development is going to go in those places is going to have not only an impact on that land and who lives there or works there or whatever, but on just stuff all around. I mean, if a big chunk of prime real estate opens up, everybody's market value suddenly goes down. That being off the land creates a scarcity that we may not have going forward. And what do we do with that land from not even an economic development, from just a master planning or I know, shocking, I'm going to get back into land use and things, but those kinds of questions are ones that are really important.
The only other topic, I mean, there's a bunch, but the topic that would be pressing for me would be, I always like to know where candidates kind of see us during their time in office, whether they're going to stay in office for 4 years or 8 years or run that and then run for mayor, or however it looks. They're going to be in office during a period of time of growth. We've got projections about the city growing over the next 10 years. I've heard projections of 1,500 or more students entering R7 over the next 10 years. We're gonna housing, those kind of topics. I'd like to what kind of city do you want to leave after your 4 or 8 years? And sometimes I ask that question because I want to hear what I think the real truth. Sometimes the truth is, that we hear candidates, I don't want the city to change. I don't want downtown to change. I don't want 50 Highway to change. I like this town like it was in 1978. I want to know that. I want to vet those things out. And if that's truly your thought, if that's truly your strategic plan for the city, let's talk about that, and let's talk about what that means for the city. If it's not, I want to know that too.
If we go back to 1978, can we have like Camaros for everybody?
Yes. We will cruise third.
We will cruise third.
We'll bring back Griff's instead of a weed shop, and we'll just drive up and down 3rd Street and have a good time.
All right. Well, Jason really wanted me to dig into the weed story there because I think that's a story that we're all going to watch for. But I'm not going to do it yet.
Okay.
Oh, you're the worst. That was the perfect segue, and you just dropped the ball.
It was, but really, my job is to annoy you, and so.
I'm so glad.
Tick one on the board for me.
I'm so glad I could. I feel like I'm the therapist sometimes when I'm the third person here, which is so not my role.
I'm going to be like, some people, John, can't do the right thing when they're on the podcast. So
I do want to because we've hinted at this a lot, and I'm going to play to Jason's favorite thing here a little bit, but. Housing development is a topic that we're going to have to talk about, and I think we need to ask our candidates about how they feel because this is something that Jason, you and I, since we started the show, have watched the council go back and forth on from the very beginning of this podcast, and that is seen studies that say there is a need and a demand for more affordable housing, for more senior housing, for multifamily housing. However, every time that has come up, it has been met with contention both from the dais and from the public. So I think one of the stories to watch is what does this next council body, however it's defined, think about the future of housing development in the city?
I agree, and the way I have sort of come to think about it is the council as a whole over time. I mean, obviously, and this has been a shifting balance, but have been generally in favor of these sorts of generic, I'll call them platitudes of housing development. We need more housing. We need more affordable housing. We need to change our balance a little bit, but they've been very resistant to every specific project, right? So it's like, not that one, and then the next one comes, well, not that one.
Or that one in that place.
Yeah, or not that one because it's close to me, but that one over there is fine, or whatever the case may be. And so it's interesting. And what we haven't had, and even in this last go-round, when we had the Alera project and the follow-up with the Osage project, as they called it, that it was actually approved by the council, going through that whole process, even then, a council member, and I'm going to pick on council member Binney because he's leaving, but he has, I think, been fairly steadfastly opposed in general to multifamily development in the city, and most specifically in his district. As a general whole, I mean, he was in favor of the downtown apartments, but that was something that's been on the city's master plan for a long time. Even then, I don't think Councilmember Binney, and this is my read of the subject, cares for multifamily housing in Lee Summit in general. I mean, like as a thing, that's not what he really would choose as his ideal, but he doesn't want to say that. And I'd be more complimentary of someone who would take a stance that blunt that I disagree with than I want someone to hem and haw and kind of try to nitpick everything because they have a discomfort at that level. So I'd like to see perhaps some more honesty coming forth from the council as we go into this next phase of housing development.
My only add into that is let's keep in mind that we've done housing. We've spent money on housing studies and the city, EDC. There's the chamber. There's been drivers that have done housing studies that have shown us. Obviously we've done for commercial real estate too. We've done the downtown study and the expanded downtown study, and we've done the housing study, and we've shown this is what people want, and these are the price points people want, and this is the type of living people want. I say it again, we've got to listen to the experts when these things come up. And Councilman Binney's votes aside, I think housing will be a huge piece of the next election, and absolutely that topic absolutely has to be in front of these candidates for all 4 districts, whether they're incumbents getting back in or brand new people to our council. I want to know from them what their priority is and how familiar they are with some of these past studies. I don't need you to read them cover to cover, but tell me that you understand what the needs are in this community. And
I'll take a different step. And it's obviously these that come, and having sat on the planning commission and watched a bunch of these, there is often neighborhood resistance to denser housing coming in there nearby. And that's understandable. And politicians by their nature are political animals. They want to make sure that their voters are happy. But at a certain point, those interests are going to rub against each other, and getting a feel for these candidates and how they're going to resolve those concerns is an important thing. I mean, sometimes you have to tell your communities, like, I understand, but this is the best available thing for this particular piece of land, and it's going to be fine. and we'll go through that.
Well, and I'm going to go back to John. I've seen you in your social media rants. This has been a common theme for you over the years. But I think it's important.
Rant's a little strong.
But I think it is also always important to remember that, like you just said, sometimes the politician has to say this is the best thing coming.
Right.
We don't always get, as the people, we don't always get to decide what the next development is.
Yep.
That's for the market, and that's for the developer with the cash to choose.
Amen.
We
And
very
so
rarely get that
sometimes,
choice.
That
right?
is
So
so
sometimes
true.
we have to have the people sitting on that dais look us in the eye and say, "I understand and I hear you, but this is the best option for now and for the future of the community."
So, and real quick to Jason's point earlier, are we seeing more of that on our council? Dare I say that we have a kinder? Do we have a kinder, gentler, more cohesive group than possibly we had before 2018? Have we seen that shift? I know that's maybe a 30,000-foot question, but whether it's housing or whether it's incentives or development or sidewalks or whatever it is we're talking about, liquor licenses or weed or whatever that night, are we seeing a council that works just a little bit better together than they used to? I think that's a huge part of these decisions that we're going to make.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that seeing what that comes forward, how is that, is that going to continue? Or, I know that that's been a high priority of the mayors, is to have comedy at the dais, not comedy, but comity at the dais.
Thank you for that, by the way.
Although occasionally we've broached off into the other, but is that going to continue? How are we going to deal with that? And then is that a sufficient thing? Sometimes the council has to take a brave stance, and we can argue that the downtown apartments thing, overriding the vote of the TIF commission,
absolutely,
there was some neighborhood opposition. There was a lot of neighborhood support as well, but when they come together, when they work, are they able to make braver decisions than they would be when they were a little bit more fractured?
Yep.
One other thing I think it's important that we bring up that's going to, again, it'll be interesting to watch, and I think interesting to talk to the candidates about, and that is that the annual for the major, what do I want to call them, subgroups out there, the public service agreements with the city are up for renewal. That includes Lee Summit Economic Development Corporation, that includes Lee Summit Chamber, that includes downtown Lee Summit Main Street. Those are all up for renewal.
Velocity is also
Velocity,
the
Lee
fourth
Summit is
PSA
on.
now.
Yeah,
Yep.
Those were all done on 3-year agreements that are subject to budget approval annually by the council. You just have to do it that way. They are all up for renegotiation and renewal this spring. So it's going to be interesting to hear the conversation, because there are people that currently sit on the dais that have made some noise about those PSAs and whether it's the best way for the city to spend its money.
Is that council member neither nor again that we're talking about? So.
Maybe, and we have seen some of the directors have come under fire from the dais, and there are some
on school board
and we've seen. We have seen one of the organizations go through a lot of turmoil over the last few years. So, PSA agreements. I think that's going to be interesting to watch. What do you guys think?
Yeah, it will be interesting to watch. And with this is not the time, although I think it would make a great. I don't know. I say it'd make a great program. The people might get put to sleep, but someday
that's never stopped us.
Having a discussion about
you listen to our episodes.
I do. Having a discussion about the bed tax and how all this got started and who put that into play through the
that is now split into many pieces.
Is now split into many pieces, but the way that came to be through the Lee Summit Economic Development Council deserves a continual nod, that there was that foresight back then to make that happen and to make sure that fund was, that bed tax was protected. Now, I'm going to speak specifically to downtown Main Street, because that's the piece that I was most intimately involved with. And back when I was on the board and eventually board president, we were in a great position coming off the GAMS Award, the Great American Main Street, and we were getting $40,000 a year at the time from the city, which was it's a drop in the budget. It was probably less than 10% at the time, and we wanted to. Janine Rand, who was the director then, made the bold move to say, we're going to ask for more. Don't know if we're going to get it. We're going to ask for more. And guess what? They got it. And it wasn't much. It was another $60,000 a year. But that's been years. I want to say that goes all the way back to maybe 2012 or 2013 when that increase happened. But in order to maintain the gem that we have in our downtown, I think it's absolutely pivotal. Those are the wrong things to look at. We start nitpicking on these PSAs. To me, in that size of budget, you want to find $60,000. You can go find $60,000. Let's protect what we've built here, and let's continue to find candidates that understand what the public-private partnership means and why it's so important.
Okay, I'm going to pause there for a second. Jason, put on the professor hat again. Just give
God.
everybody a quick reminder of what these agreements are and what the city is asking from each of these organizations.
Well, essentially, they're contracts. The city has hired these organizations to do certain tasks to promote. Generally speaking, they have made it tourism related, although I don't know that the Velocity contract falls directly under that, but they have been sort of tourism related to do things to enhance, in case of downtown Main Street, to enhance downtown, to enhance the quality of applicants or people to come in and start and grow businesses in Lee Summit, both for Chamber and for EDC, although on different terms. For marketing aspects, for the actual tourism marketing goes through through another piece of that
through
money,
the Chamber, yeah,
but it comes through the Chamber and those sorts of things. So it's essentially the city has hired these organizations to do this work on their behalf on that. And one of the questions that always gets asked and that people try to raise is, what's the return, right? What would doing all of these things in-house cost that we can do on that? And obviously, if you want somebody to run your Chamber of Commerce, it's going to cost a lot more than it's only 50 something. I think that the Chamber gets
40 or 50. Yeah.
And what do they do for that? What does that 60,000 buy and those sorts of things? And those are questions that are good to ask, but these are another good questions for, we have an opportunity through this election process, if we want to get back into that for a second, to really sort of let these candidates separate themselves on what they know and how they know going in. It's always a really, really steep learning curve when you go from candidate to elected official. But the ones who make that the least steep are the ones I think that, hopefully will separate themselves through this process. And having this come up now at the same time as we're going through that, I think gives us an opportunity to not only have that conversation about what the PSAs are and what they do,
right,
but also then, get these, see if the candidates can keep up.
I think it's also important not to ask the candidates not just what they know already, but to hear their response and what are they willing to learn. Because I think you said it right there, that there is a big learning curve to go from candidate to actually sitting there.
Absolutely. And I think, there is a linkage between the PSA money and the bed tax. I mean, there always had, that was the original estimation.
There definitely is. Yeah.
They diverged for a bit and kind of have reconverged over the years. And I know the bed tax has increased a little bit. And if we add more development in downtown, like a hotel, then those hotel beds are the things that generate that tax. So the more of that we have, the better off that these organizations will be. And hopefully they can they can continue to do that good work as they go forward. So it'll be interesting. And I know that the council has over time taken a few jabs at the EDC specifically at times. And I know right now the Chamber is in between leaders. So that's going to create a little bit of uncertainty, and downtown is once again coming off a national award and all those sorts of things. So, I don't want to look at it as, and I hope that our candidates and our council members don't look at it as a zero-sum sort of a thing. But there is some of that push-pull that goes along in there, and I know that some of our electeds have sort of viewed it that way, at least in the recent past.
And just point of clarification that yes, the Chamber is in between leaders. Matt Barrett is currently the interim running things. He's probably doing 2 or 3 jobs over at the Chamber right now. But just point of fact, they're seeking that new head, but the ship isn't running without a. It
doesn't have me at the helm, so it's not like about to hit the iceberg.
Have Nick at the helm or anything. Yeah. But you bring up a good point. That unfortunately the change in regimes, and whether that's Jim Devine a couple of years ago or most recently with 2 presidents in the last 3 years or so at the Chamber, those things make headlines, and those are things that we have to discuss as a community, and how we attract leaders to run very vital organizations in Lee Summit. Well,
I think that all sets up, I think, a lot of questions that hopefully hopefully voters are going to be asking their candidates as they get to meet them. I know, Jason, you and I will be asking questions as we get to know the candidates. We are looking to plan some candidate interviews over the coming months. We're hoping to have maybe a public forum or two out there. So we'll be following up with that as well. But as always, we encourage voters to go out and get to know those candidates. And John, I know as a columnist and a rabid user of the social media channels,
yes,
you will be asking questions as well. I want to get now to one last topic.
It's weed, right?
Oh, okay. Two last topics.
Yes!
All right.
Thank God we're going to discuss weed.
Let's get the medical marijuana story out there first, and then we'll go to the last one. And look, I don't know that there's a lot to really say other than this is just a continuing, ongoing story that from the state level, as medical marijuana is legalized in the state of Missouri, and they go through their licensing processes. Jason, why don't you just real quick, where are we now, and what are we going to be looking at in the coming months?
Sure. The state is in the process of handing out the licenses for the various business types to do that. And as it turns out, there are no Lee Summit businesses that have been granted a license for cultivation, transportation, or testing. We do have the one left, and the one that really most people care about are the dispensaries. The state has said that they're going to put that out towards the end of January. I think the 23rd or 24th is their announced date. We'll see where those are, which ones grant. There's a building on 3rd Street that's being developed for that. There are other stores that are in planned, but not all of them are going to get licenses. So it's going to have an impact, for one, on which of those businesses actually start, but where they are, and then how they interact, and what they're. And there's been a ton of concern expressed over time by Lee Summit Cares about how their regulations are going to be and what they're going to be doing and all that. And that we went through an entire, a zoning and planning process about them over the last year as well. So seeing them once they get going, I think will be interesting to see how they go.
Some interesting culture shifts right now with that, having this discussion, and some of then also the tobacco age going up to 21, and if you ask, I don't want to speak for them, if you ask Lee Summit Cares and if you ask some of the counselors and other people at our middle and high schools, and maybe the grade schools, vaping is still the number one topic, I think, that's happening, kind of centered around that. And there's this whole discussion about, if we open up these stores, are the kids going to start vaping marijuana? I don't know. I don't have any of those answers. I've followed this from a kind of a peripheral view, but
Did you view it through a cloud of smoke?
I viewed it through a cloud of something. But like the two of us, I have a grade middle school, grade school child, and you guys have kids that are a little bit older, and whether we like it or not, that's the topic. There's going to be that's going to come in front of council more than once next year.
Just as a quick response,
am I right about that?
As a quick response to that, I have over the last year gotten to know a group of teens in the community, and during last summer they did a podcast takeover and talked about mental health and teen issues. We are now working with them. They want to spin off into their own podcast, so that's going to be happening in the spring. But in response to what you just said, here's something they told me is from their perspective, they see the vaping use going down among kids.
Really?
And they don't think it's as big a thing as it was maybe the previous couple of years. So that was just interesting just to hear their perspective on it.
That's who we should be listening to.
And because I was kind of asking them,
right,
nudging them a little bit for their thoughts on issues, and they said they were kind of hoping that the counselors and the people in their schools would talk to them about some other topics instead, because they feel like it's finally going the right way with vaping, and that's going down. Right. So interesting perspective.
Well, the people
before we move
honestly, come on, all of us old people are like probably telling the kids about how to use Facebook safely, and they're like, Facebook, we don't use that. So we're always two things behind anyway. So
stop watching MTV; it's bad for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Those music videos will get you.
All right. Well, here's the last news topic for this episode. This is a relatively new one, but we're going to be watching that. Former Lee Summit R7 Superintendent Dr. Dennis Carpenter has recently filed a lawsuit, I believe through his new consulting business, but has filed a lawsuit against the Lee Summit EDC, specifically Rick McDowell, for harming his business.
That's the official legal words.
Jason will give legalese.
The official legal words are tortious interference with contract, and I won't throw John, but John knows what those words mean.
I do very much so.
And going through that process, so it's going to be interesting to see. I mean, I know that when the story sort of broke before there was actually a filed document, we were wondering, it's like, there's got to be more than, $1,500 worth. But I mean, I will say this. I took a very admittedly surface look not long ago, and there doesn't seem to be a lot more than that $1,500 at stake, but we'll see where it goes from there. It's an interesting thing, and we'll be seeing that. And it's not the only lawsuit involving, current and former members of the school district that is floating around right now.
This is probably a suit in principle, like you said, $1,500. It's not much. Maybe this is a suit to make a point. But this is the topic that's been going on for the last 2 weeks since this hit the news. And to me, it illustrates again just exactly how much power some of these current and now in this case former members of our school district administration team, how much power they still have in the local press to get that story on TV without a single document. So, of course, at that point, the TV station calls Rick McDowell. Well, Rick McDowell can't say anything because I haven't seen the lawsuit. And looks like this paperwork was filed maybe just right before Christmas. Is that right, Jason?
It looks like it was filed on the 18th, but may not have been out until...
Yeah, it was very interesting when that story broke, because the first thing we did was
go look for
get online to look for it, and it hadn't been filed yet. That's something we'll follow that as it goes along. I'm sure there will be topics that Jason, you and I will hit on the podcast as it goes forward. Just real quick before we wrap things up for this episode, Jason, how long do these kind of processes take? I mean, is this something that we'll be talking about for a year, for 2 years?
Quite possibly. I mean, it depends in no small part. It depends on what Dennis Carpenter's goal with that is. He could, if his goal is to, and I don't want to I'm not casting this on anyone, but if his goal is to specifically just to extract money in a short-term basis, it may not last very long. There may be a settlement, a nuisance settlement or something of that nature, all the way up through if he wants the victory lap of winning, a judgment on the merits at the court. It can and that could last for years, just to given the speed, and that's not the right word to use, but how slowly things crawl through the legal system. It can be a long time just to get to a point where a judge talks about it.
Can I insert one goal?
Sure.
I would submit that a partial goal of this lawsuit is to depose.
Yeah, and it may be
get people in front of a microphone with a court reporter and a couple of attorneys and tell me what you have, because there has to be an email, there has to be a phone call, there has to be some kind of thing that led to this paperwork being filed. I think a large part of the goal is let's depose these people and find out what they know.
So and that is another not uncommon goal of a lawsuit, is to find out information.
Well, I think that's going to wrap up, I think, for this episode, but it's a nice segue into Friday's episode. So we hope everybody comes back, because on Friday we're going to talk about stories coming in 2020 that concern the Lee Summit R7 School District. I know there are a lot of things people are looking forward to, a lot of things people are talking about. Namely, there's also an election concerning the school district. So we will be back and talk to everybody on Friday.
All hail.
You have been listening to Lee Summit Town Hall, a Link to Lee Summit podcast with hosts Nick Parker and Jason Norberry. A proud member of the Fredcast Network, you can subscribe to this podcast on most of your favorite podcast apps and catch us every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for all the news, analysis, and conversations on the Lee Summit community. Connect with us on Facebook at Link to Lee Summit or on Twitter at LS Town Hall.